Okay, so William, thank you very much for coming on the Lean Musician podcast.
My
Number
great
one,
pleasure.
it's
Yes.
great to have you. I feel very blessed to have you on the podcast because, especially on the first one, because I feel like your work is. We wanted to put you on the first one because your work's kind of at the core of the way that we're starting to think about music. Me and Tom here at Lean Musician, and yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do. So, for those of you who haven't read your book or know your work, I'd love it if you could give us just a quick kind of summary of who you are, what you're up to, and yeah, what you do.
Yes, well, of course, it's a great delight for me to find out that a book that I wrote can reach people in the way that it's reached you and Tom. So that's wonderful to hear. I'm a concert pianist. I live in Texas now. I'm from New York originally. I'm a university professor and an active performer. I've been doing this on the university level for about 38 years. I tried to calculate that before we had our talk today. Uh, And in recent decades, I've gotten much more actively and seriously involved in the pedagogy side of things. And that's been a thrill, something I hadn't really perhaps anticipated quite that way, which led to the book and to the establishment of my workshops and other kinds of things that are in a way non-traditional and in some ways not. But I found I've become a voice for a certain kind of view, especially towards perfectionism and how to stay healthy mentally and physically in the face of the kind of quasi perfection we aspire to in music, especially classical music. That's been a privilege for me to find that I've been able to articulate and be heard and be part of the conversation pedagogically about some views that are not quite the accepted.
Sure, and we'll absolutely get into those.
Right.
Yeah, that's something I'd love to talk about.
Sure.
Let's just go right back to the beginning and about you and when you started music. Can you remember any early memories? I mean, I
I wish
know
I
a
could
bit,
remember
but
more. I guess most people do, but of their very early years. But um, we had a baby grand piano in our house, and that was a kind of a plaything for me, which was nice. Um, and I love to talk about my beginnings because I found them to be really germane to everything that followed. The older I get, the more I understand this to be the case. And it was just very lucky, I think, because I was 3 years old and I was a sort of a excitable 3 year old. I wasn't sort of hyperactive in any kind of problematic way, but um, my parents were told maybe this little kid needs a kind of an outlet for his energies. But they knew I was musically good. I had a good ear and I could pick out tunes on the piano and stuff like that. Something was going on with me musically. And my mother, I think, happened to just see a little sign in the butcher shop or something like that in our little neighborhood in Queens, New York, where I grew up, saying, music class for 3 year olds. This turned out to be a class in eurythmics, Dalcroze eurythmics, and we can get into that later. Anyway, it's a exciting and brilliantly conceived music approach for any age, really, but it certainly has been used most successfully with little kids who are, you know, physically in their bodies in a very joyous way, and they love to do playful things, and they love to learn new things. And they're very musical anyway. Anyone who hangs around little 3 year olds knows that so many of them are, if not all, are musically very engaged in this fantastic way, as long as nothing comes along to remove that. Uh, so that's it. This seemed to be the kind of thing that would maybe keep me occupied and give me an outlet for my energies. And so off I went to Dalcroze class.
so how long did you do those for?
2 years.
2 years, and then
Yeah, and I
how did it?
kind of remember it. I think I can picture the room that it was in and so on. What I do remember um, is how much fun it was. I mean, fun in a very deep sense, because the essence of Dalcroze not only does it posit that we can learn all about musical elements, rhythm and pitch and everything else in our whole body. But one of the main ideas about it is that it's playful. You set up some games and you try to trick people and you try to be clever and see if they can be clever enough to follow you and all that. So it engages your sense of fun and play and intelligence too.
Mhm.
which you can do in any age. And so I loved that. And I can still remember this sort of, tingling feeling of excitement, waiting for the next little part of the game to come along and see if I could respond. And so and I've thought about this a lot in recent years. And I think what that gave me was so lucky because it gave me the sense that doing challenging things, rigorous things in music is nothing but fun and a kind of a thrill and an excitement and a joy. So that was my sort of inoculation in a positive way into what music could be. And I think what that did, although I wasn't aware at the time, it sort of gave me the sense like anything that comes along in terms of musical learning that isn't joyous and fun and exciting and
Mm,
engaging, it's something wrong with it. So if I have a teacher who doesn't make me feel that way, something wrong with that teacher or an approach or whatever it might be. So it's a great way to get introduced to the idea of music learning. So I started, piano lessons at 5, and then I found that to be very, very easy transition because the Dalcroze had, made elements of rhythm and all of this and pitch so familiar to me that learning to read music and play it at the piano was just like a natural extension of all of that. So I always, it's hard to give advice to parents who ask you, about exactly what to do with little kids or about music training, but I find myself feeling safest by saying, start with something that's holistic, like Dalcroze or some of the other um, things that are out there, Kindermusik, Musikgarten, similar approaches that are not about performing, are not about an instrument, not about doing it for the parents or anyone else, but just about experience.
right, right, for sure. So after that, you started piano lessons, and it sounds like that Dalcroze and those piano lessons were a really good positive foundation. But I'm interested in what you say about how you kind of knew with that at your foundation. You knew when you came across kind of tuition or, other people's philosophies of how to play and study music that kind of jarred with you. What were some of the later experiences of coming up against that, and were there any challenges that you had?
Well, I mean, I began playing the piano early, and I seemed rather precocious at it in the way that I could play with, flow and maturity. But I wasn't very ambitious, and I didn't progress all that much during my younger years. I didn't really have the aspiration to be a concert pianist, and I was bored. I mean, with the practicing thing, and some of the teachers didn't quite know what to do with me. It wasn't terribly negative, but it wasn't exciting either. And I didn't really know how to solve problems. So I was lucky about a lot of things. And what uh, really changed it for me was by the time I got into college, I went to university at a young age because of the way the school system worked in New York. Sometimes people would be accelerated through the system. So I was only about 16 when I went to college. Um, and it was an unusual situation because this was a public university, which at the time is a very fine school in New York City, but at the time it was free tuition, which is unusual in the States, to residents of New York City, which meant that they couldn't afford to give us actual lessons in the studio in performance, even if you were a music major. So I wasn't doing a performance degree. I was doing just a kind of a general music degree, Bachelor of Arts degree, really liberal arts degree at that point, which suited me fine. I didn't really know where all this was leading professionally. And all they did at this university was they expected us in an informal way to be doing something with our own, with performing studies on our own, not as part of the university program. And they wanted to hear everybody perform something at the end of each year. You'd go into a room, a kind of a classroom, and play or sing a few pieces for the faculty, and that was it. There was no teeth in it. They weren't giving us a grade or anything. But they knew me by now. I'd been there for a year and kind of knew what I was capable of. And I went in there and played a few nice pieces that classical pieces, Schubert, something else, I forget what, but things that I knew I could always play very pleasingly and make an impression. And, so I played them just fine, very nice, and waited for the accolades to rained down. Well, that's not at all what happened. They just kind of gave me this funny look and said, "Well, Bill, do you have any plans to learn how to play the piano for real?" If those weren't the exact words, it's pretty close. So, in other words, what you're doing is not playing the piano for real. It's something else, which is easy for you. What I loved about this, although it was very hard to live through at the moment at the time, what I loved about it didn't tell me what I needed to do and like, oh, you ought to do this and you should do that. They weren't saying that at all. They're just like holding up a mirror to me saying, what you're doing is not the real thing. And you know that. And but you better make up your mind soon if you want to become a more viable concert pianist, or else just don't bother. Which was really a great way to handle me. So I thought, well, I'm intrigued. I wonder what that would be like. And so that's what really turned the corner for me. And I went to see a teacher who I knew from my neighborhood. I'd known him for years, but I'd never taken a lesson from him. And so his name was Leopold Mittman, and he was Russian and had studied in Warsaw and at the conservatory, and was doing a very European brand of conservatory private teaching in his house. And he was very astute at how he handled me and listened to me play something and said, "Okay, here's the situation. You have facility, but no technique."
Mhm.
So that's very intriguing. Don't know exactly what that means, but I think you're right. Whatever you're saying, it has the ring of truth. Uh, and at this point, I wasn't defensive at all. I was just like, I just want to find out what people are talking about because I think they're right. I know enough to know that there's something I'm not getting here. And so he said, uh, uh, and I don't know if you know the movie The Karate Kid, but
Yes.
to me, it's brilliant pedagogically, and I show it in my piano pedagogy classes and so on, or scenes from it.
Mhm.
And he did a kind of a something much like the master in that movie with me. We kind of made a deal with each other, and it was quite wonderful. And he said, "Yes, you have no technique, but he said I can transfer to you an understanding of what I mean by a technique. It wouldn't take that long, maybe 6 weeks. But during those 6 weeks, you won't be able to play very well at all. Everything will be sloppy and out of control because you'll still be figuring out something very deep about what it is to play the piano. And after that, you'll get it."
Sort of like a break you down so you can build
Totally
you up
breaking it
again.
down and asking me to trust him.
Right. How did you feel when he
Totally.
said that?
I'm excited.
Great.
Like, great, let's do it. I didn't have to think about it twice.
And so what was that process like? What did you get up to in those
Well,
6 weeks?
i- it was a couple of very basic things, and one of the questions that you mentioned to me before we connected today, I think is I'm going to deal with now, although it's
Great.
later in the list, which is it was something very basic, like, well, what is this technique? Is it something mysterious or what? And he said, I can tell it to you in one sentence, and this probably would apply to any any genre of performing if you want to do it technically in a healthy and satisfying way. And it would be a sentence something like this: you have to make a thorough commitment to every note, a physical commitment to every note. It's possible to play the piano, for example, in a very surface way that sounds pretty and nice, but you aren't physically making a kind of complete commitment. Commitment meaning you kind of fall right into it, like you've just dived off a cliff with that amount of trust and letting go and sensing the bottom of the key. So you're like totally committing to the experience of playing that F sharp or that C or whatever it might be. And this is a completely new idea to me. And never heard of it before, never thought of it. I was trying to make my music sound pretty and pleasing and what it's supposed to be. Never occurred to me that there was a step before that of making a commitment physically to every note, regardless of how loud or soft or anything it was supposed to be. So, very interesting. And part of that is the other kernel that I have to mention, which I alluded to a second ago, which is in order to thoroughly make a relaxed, free commitment to every note, you have to kind of let go of everything, which is where the you're not going to be in control for a while part came in. So that meant you're missing the note, you're looking right at it, and you're hitting something else. You're playing in the cracks, or you're fumbling or missing what you meant, which is, once you get used to it, quite exciting and then endlessly intriguing if you're not upset by it. So I was just ready for all this. I had nothing at stake, no concerts I needed to play. I wasn't playing concerts at that time. So it was great. I was just an open field to just experiment with complete mental and physical curiosity about what is he talking about. And from the very beginning, it just felt so congenial to me and so healthy and great that I didn't need much convincing.
That's fantastic. I'm kind of conscious to not rush on too quickly from that, because I know that it's interesting what you say, that you were so ready for that at that point, and you'd had a really good kind of foundation in your childhood. It sounded like some
Yeah.
good mentors and stuff like that. For someone who's kind of listening to the podcast and kind of doesn't really grok or get that as an idea, they kind of listen to what you said there about totally committing to a no, and you did unpack it a bit. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on it. What does it actually mean to totally commit, both physically? Is it's psychological as well, and also let go? Can you say anything more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question and a good question. I'm glad you're kind of holding me to it for a minute. And I've had to teach this to lots of people who have not been lucky enough to have a joyous beginning, like I described as a little toddler, you know, or an introduction to this idea earlier on in their life. Um, and it takes getting used to, for sure. Uh, It's I mean, the first step is a kind of a sensing what relaxation feels like in your body, which in itself is a kind of a new thing. And many piano teachers do this because we deal with the, the weight of the arm. We deal with gravity, unlike other instruments where you push keys down and do different kinds of actions, um, or draw a bow across a string or something like that. We just sort of can let gravity work for us, and so that means we have to figure out what is it to be relaxed and find out what your arm weighs, uh, and that's really the first step, which can is sometimes kind of a big deal. Uh, letting the teacher or someone else just say, "Let me take your arm and just give it to me and trust me to have it." And if I let go of it, it's going to go flopping down and might hit something. In other words, you have no control of it. So it's psychological too and physical at that very basic level. And in order to teach that, I'll have them take my arm and I'll trust them to do anything they want with it, and they see how that works and so on. So that's the first step. What is it to trust it, and what is it to free it? And then, it's sort of, what does it feel like to let anything happen when you come to the keyboard? I mean, it's once you get used to the idea, it's intriguing. Most people find it fun in a way, and are not too fearful of it. It's just brand new. Does that
Hmm.
begin to answer
Hmm.
your question?
It does, yeah, and I'm sure we'll touch on it later on as well. Um, so you've got this good mentor, and you're having lessons with him. Let's fast forward a bit to when you started actually doing this kind of work yourself, so teaching others, and because it came fairly naturally to you. And when did you encounter people who maybe were in need of kind of more understanding in this area?
Well, it's just about all the time. From the beginning of my teaching, I started teaching at the age of 16, and yeah, I mean, it's basically 99% of. I hate to say that, but I mean, really, it's more or less true. Maybe 95% of people that I've worked with are grappling with some kind of a, how can I say, subtly accumulated tension that comes from trying to control things too much, blurring the practice process with performing. That's another thing I got from Mittman, which was very sensible to me, which is that practicing something and playing it are very, 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 very different activities. And if you're not clear on how they're different, you'll come into trouble.
I would love to hear more about that, actually. It's a question I was going to ask you in a minute.
Well, in the act of performing, then you bring all your powers of attention and control and um, wanting what you want. You bring that all into play at every moment so you can perform at your very, very best. In practice, you want to unpack all of that because if you're performing all the time, here, let me put it another way. There's an analogy that he used, which I think still works for me, which is like every time you perform something the way you really want it to be, it's like you're kind of spending a little bit of money out of your bank account in terms of your technique. If you were to perform something 5 times in a row, just the way you want it to be, by the end of those 5 times, you've lost a little bit of technique. So every time you spend something out of your bank account by performing something one time, you got to pay it back in by doing things that are technically very constructive and you know them to be constructive, like let me sink into this finger and help it be strong and relax again and remind my wrist how it can be free here, and all these things that you know help you because there's 1,000 little moments in the course of a piano piece that we need to encourage our body to be technically healthy and strong, and it'll evaporate if we don't keep doing these things. So practicing is your chance to make things better, stronger, freer, more automatic and congenial, a sensuous pleasure to do. Performing is when you cash in on all that stuff. And I found this to be a very healthy division. It's hard to talk about without misspeaking. And I end up saying things I don't quite mean, like practice, mechanically, which is not at all what I mean. Or, do you know what I mean? It's or practice without music, which is not what I mean either. It's not unmusical at all, but it certainly is breaking it down as a craftsman, as a craftsperson, so that everything you're doing it some good. And so it's so tempting to want to do too much performing in the practice room. Should we do some? Yeah, occasionally, sure. Try to see really what you can do with that piece and put all the pieces together. But just make sure that you offset that with 5 times more of really constructive technical work. So in other words, that's your workshop. And then when you walk on stage, he said that's when your performance comes together.
Hmm.
That's you shouldn't leave your best performance in the practice room, and everything you do on stage is a pale shadow of what you once achieved in the practice room. Try to do all the preliminary things, that'll make you wonderful, and then walk on stage and trust it all to come together.
Yeah, I no really appreciate you making that distinction. It's a really good one, and I have heard that analogy once or twice before.
Good. I'm glad that other people are saying it because it's you don't forget it, and it's
And it's also one of those things that you feel as it's this kind of funny analogy that you've come up with or you've heard along the lines, and you think that other people don't think that way. So it's gratifying to hear that not just you but Mitman as well.
yeah. I mean, it's so tempting. I mean, that's the thing. It's so tempting. We love the music. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't love the music. And a lot of times, let's say if I'm giving a lesson to graduate students someplace, somebody I don't know, but I'm just working with them for the first time, and they will tell me, I've got these tension problems in my shoulder and in my wrist, and I'm tense in my mind, and I'm thinking maybe you can help me. They'll play something very intelligently and very in a very cultivated way, but I can perceive that their problems are real. And as they have said, and then my first question is always, tell me how you tend to work on this. And I usually can predict what they're going to say, which is, well, I remember all the great things that I heard in my lesson about how you can voice the top note just so and make sure that these accompanying notes are very, very, very even and pianissimo. And so, and then I remember all these wonderful artistic things that we talked about. And then I try to do that very slowly, but very carefully every day to make sure, they're trying to pursue the result itself every day. And that just flat doesn't work. It doesn't work.
So for me, this kind of makes me think about goals, and in a sense, getting our goals mixed up between practice and performance. What do you think our goal is in practice as opposed to performance?
Okay, this is something I've thought about too a lot, and I think that if there's like a overall like sentence like written in the air right above your instrument or in your practice room, like that could say, here's the overweening, here's the goal that I have for all my practicing. For many people, unfortunately, that goal is I want everything to sound just the way it's supposed to sound. That to me is not a very fruitful goal. So for me, it's a different thing entirely. My goal is, it's like a question: how can everything that I'm doing feel great? That's mostly it. How can everything feel wonderful? Not just be correct. Correct's not good enough. It has to feel actively great. So it's completely about how it feels to you, trusting that that will lead to even much more control over your sound and much more of a color palette and much more of a effortless control of dynamics and all the things you want that are refined. All comes from how can everything feel great.
I'm really interested in what you said about earlier about sensuous pleasure of practice,
Yeah.
but also you said the mechanical side of practice in the sense of on working on things and breaking them down. For many people, they'd be kind of at odds with each other. Are they at odds for you, or
Yeah,
how do you
I
think
probably
about
shouldn't
that?
say mechanical. Let's think, say neuromuscular. I mean, that'd be a much better way. Are they at odds? No, no. I mean, in fact, here, to me, what the joy of coming across a teacher like Mittman, who helped me understand this, was that I finally knew really what to practice for. Uh, I had a goal that I could be intrigued with, and it it didn't have to do with my trying to be expressive all the time or musically successful all the time. It's quite fun to work on the neuromuscular stuff. I think. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's it's fun because it feels good. I'm a pianist, so I think about the fingers and their relative, weakness and strength, which is certainly not the same, and all the possible ways we can have tension or release tension. So when I'm playing well, it feels actively wonderful to me. It's a pleasure. I like it physically. Uh,
I'm wondering whether we could actually I don't know whether you could do this, but sort of give this as an example. Sort of imagine that you are practicing a certain passage and describe, because it's one of those things that just no one has access to. We as musicians don't have access to other musicians' brains, and
mm,
yet obviously there is a distinct uh, difference in people's ability to practice. So not just to play their instrument, but you have people who are very good at practicing, and you also have people who are very wasteful and not very good at practicing and spend hours. I myself have also done both of those.
sure.
And I'm just interested in as to getting more of an idea of your process.
Well, this might work as an example. I mean, we all know that physiologically, the what pianists call the fourth finger and string players call the third finger. In other words, the ring finger next to the pinky is physiologically hampered. It's tied to the fingers around it. It will never have the independence of other fingers. You can barely lift it if you're holding your other fingers down. And none of that will ever change. So that every passage that has all our fingers involved has a built-in weakness of the fourth finger. So it's nice to kind of chase those down and identify them and use some practice to kind of do something about it. So it's a pleasure to come to a passage that does that and sort of stop when you get to it and and take a moment to just let your whole weight of your arm sink in pleasurably, which feels very therapeutic in your wrist and all up and down, up in your shoulder and everywhere else. When I say arm, I'm really meaning your shoulder too, that whole side of your body. Just trustingly sink in and let that fourth finger hold it all up and rotate around. I'm doing this on my desk while I'm talking to you. No one can see me, but I'm, I'm gesturing to show you what I mean. So, yeah. So, and so you turned what was a weakness and something you're a little bit edgy about, like, oh, I hope my fourth finger will perform and not let me down. You turn that into a very positive thing where you luxuriate in the feeling of, oh, how strong my fourth finger can feel, and as it holds up the weight of my arm. You never can make it really strong, but you can make it more functional in terms of getting the arm weight to get into it. That's one example. Or jumping from place to place. If we're uptight about, let's say you're a string player doing a difficult shift, or a pianist jumping from place to place, which we do a lot. If you are nervous about missing it and you're feeling that subtle tension, that's not pleasurable. Or if you're castigating yourself every time you miss because yesterday you got it right. Um, if instead you have this pleasurable feeling of your arm kind of jumping with a nice graceful arc from place to place in a generous way, that's fun to do. That feels nice, and you have to trust your body to. Yeah, I may miss it two or three times, but then without your changing what you're doing at all, it begins to find it. Your body begins to find it. It loves to learn this way. So I hope those are maybe more vivid examples of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely, it is. Uh, One of the things I find, and I know in my conversations with other musicians that they find, is that when you kind of get into this place of kind of relaxed practice and you're not performing, you've made that distinction between them both. There seems to be, and I'm sure there is forever and ever, an abundance of things that you could work on at any one time. And you can also, it's kind of, without sounding pretentious, it's kind of fractal in the sense that the deeper you go with this small thing, the bigger it gets. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So, so how do you kind of filter or prioritize? And what's your advice to students, or just does it just depend on the circumstance
Well,
and the?
this is where the intelligence comes into practicing. It takes an intelligent person to figure out what's my next challenge. How can I define it? What would be a smart thing for me to do in the next 5 minutes? Is it these two notes? Is it these 12 measures? Is it this left hand? What is it? And you'll know because it's a kind of gestalt idea like the thing that needs to emerge will emerge. You'll know if you're paying attention what feels a little insecure or a little bit tense or where you were faking it a little bit or you'll know. And then it's just being smart about how to set up your little fractal moment, your little well-defined piece of it, and do that. So I don't think that's anything to be overly concerned about. Once you're awake to that's your job, uh, carrying it out, I don't think is all that tricky.
Mm-hmm,
I mean,
mm-hmm.
I prefer that to saying I'm going to play this passage 10 times perfectly, and each time I'm going to move a penny from the left side of the piano to the right, and if I mess up I have to start all over again. There's actually a place for even for that in practicing. If there's something you just
Right.
cannot get the accuracy and you have to do that, sure, there's a place for everything in practicing, uh, but primarily no. I think the most productive practicing is constantly redefining what you're doing, so it's mentally quite absorbing and actually a bit taxing. I find I can't do it for more than a couple of hours, 3 hours or so. I mean, I could keep on playing, but my mind would get a little worn out.
Right. Yeah.
It all comes from this kind of, first of all, knowing as a kind of fundamental way. Here's how I understand great feeling playing to feel. Whether it's singing a note if you're a singer, this is what it feels like to sing when it feels great. And this is what it feels like to play the cello when it feels great. You have to have a kind of an experience that you can come back to and say, I'm comparing everything to this.
Right.
Um,
That's great. Yeah.
and then you'll know what you're about because, then any moments that don't resemble that in some way, or you can't quickly find some of that experience in it, that's some place where you want to drill down and you want to find something more. So it guides itself in that way. We can't do this kind of practicing until we figured out what does it mean for something to feel great.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to hear. I'd love to move on to performance now
Sure.
because you're a performer and have been your whole life. And the people often talk about just kind of spellbinding performances and that how the person was really in the zone. That's often from an audience perspective, but people, high level performers, talk about being in the zone themselves. What does that mean to you, or is it kind of just a vague concept?
Well, I think no, it's a very fruitful concept, and I love all the ideas, the names that have been come up with to describe something like being in the zone. Or I very much like the whole flow idea as that's been defined Two, I mean, there are several aspects to this. One has to do with practicing before we get into performing. Practicing itself, when you're doing the kind of work that I've been talking about, where you are allowing yourself to be challenged and inviting risk and all of that, that's very engaging to the mind and body, and so it's kind of a blissful activity, really. Uh, I find, and that is a functional kind of a flow to be in, where you know what I mean. Your challenges are just a little bit beyond where you're comfortable, and that's kind of great. So that's one thing that really I subscribe to that whole formulation completely. I think that's great. Now, and when it comes to performing, it's very complex, it's very unpredictable, and it's very thrilling. I mean, this is something where you really feel like you're truly alive when you're performing. Um, I feel like it's a kind of altered state. Uh, we never know exactly in what way it's going to be altered. That's one of the things that's exciting about it. It can go in any direction. And no matter how experienced you are, that's still true. Um, so you have to kind of invite that. That's one of the reasons, by the way, why we want to do a kind of a over learning in the practice room in terms of technique, so that we've got a comfortable margin for wherever the performing moment will take us. So this altered state, it's a flow that it's an experience that um, I my own approach to it has everything to do with the audience and the fact that the audience is there. The fact that we feel altered comes from the fact that people are listening and they're not there in the practice room. And in this very primitive human experience level, it makes a big difference to us, as we all know, if people are listening and it's an official kind of a performance. The stakes are high and so on, and it can be terrifying. But also, we can open up to that and say, well, people are listening, so maybe if I embrace that as part of what's happening here and let that be part of this altered experience, the fact that it's not just me doing something and hoping it's okay or goes well, but it's a lot of people together psychologically right now in this tacit community that we're sharing. And I'm the one that's doing something to engender a kind of mutual communication. And so that's how I like to think of this altered state and the zone that I love to find myself in when it happens in performance. The other thing about performing that I just like to talk about, because I think
Yeah.
this was a discovery that I made during those same college years when so much of this became clear um, to me and was inspiring to me. Um, was when I first had a chance to play as a soloist with orchestra, as a winner of a competition. I'd never done this before, and it was in a big hall with a big audience, and it was quite overwhelming to me. And it took me quite a while to kind of get into this situation and find myself there and not feel kind of frozen.
Hmm.
Um, but when that did happen later on in the evening, and I was playing, a sort of favorite passage of mine, it was a cadenza in the Rimsky-Korsakov concerto. Um, Music I really loved, and I knew that I knew how to play it meaningfully and all that. I made this discovery, which no one had spoken to me about, so I felt it was one of those kind of pure things for me, which was that I really felt something happen that was inspiring, which was that this music that I knew so well suddenly took on a level of meaning that I had not thought about. Like now I finally understand what it means, which I couldn't in the practice room. I think this is what my teacher had been talking about. Why do I understand now? Because those 2,000 people are there and I can feel their attention, which initially was scaring me when I started the evening. And now it's like there's this sharing going on, and they're informing me tacitly about something about what this music really means as a human expression. So it's like this sort of circuit, what I call a circuit of meaning. And I've tried to unpack this philosophically in different ways. It's very tricky, but it's also very tangible. And I think people probably know what I'm talking about. People have been part of that circuit, either on stage or in the audience, or whatever. So I think this is true for any performer, any amateur player just doing it for fun and a little bit scared about what is it like to play a performance. If you open your mind to the fact like it's not just about will I do well and survive and all that, but that's kind of narcissistic really. But instead of that, what will happen when I share this music that I know so well and believe in and love with other people? What will happen when we're tacitly sharing it in a room and in a given moment? How might the meaning of it expand into something new? And anyone can experience that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Um, we're getting close to wrapping up now. There was one kind of fundamental question I wanted to touch on, which is kind of ties in with the title of your book, which for those of
Mm.
you who, I can't remember whether we've mentioned it yet, for those of you who haven't read it, it's called The Perfect Wrong Note, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But we've all heard about we should embrace mistakes and things like that, and we've kind of touched on this, but your book takes it to a whole new level, and I'm interested as to how you have thought about mistakes over the years and how this has developed. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm delighted that you feel like that it goes a little bit deeper. I hope that it does. I've had to figure out a lot about how to try to talk about this because when I first gave talks about this, I know I wasn't doing a good enough job because people thought that I was saying, don't fret if you make a mistake. It's not a big deal. The world's still spinning and the sun will rise tomorrow. And, Babe Ruth, was a big slugger in baseball, but he hit a lot. He struck out a lot too. And, that's not my message at all. So, um, what I'm trying to say, but let me say once again, this is not new with me. This was a philosophy that I was taught. It goes all the way back to my teacher, Leopold Mittmann, was a student of Frédéric Chopin. So, I mean, a lot of this pianistic approach and instrumental approach has been out there for generations. Anyway, I'm just the inheritor of it. But uh, it's not just forgiving ourselves and saying let me try again. It's totally embracing the mistake and saying what's the information in that mistake, because that's probably the best information I'm going to get. It's going to save me a lot of time if I can really find out what it's telling me. And so that the more we get into it is intriguing and interesting and a very objective experience which in itself is psychologically healthy. We let go of all the you know success and failure dichotomy, which is not how we have to see it at all. I wish we had another word beside mistake. you know
sure, yeah.
uh, Unexpected occurrence or something like that. I mean, that's really all that it is. Something happens that isn't what we expected, period. So then it's like, okay, that's surprising. I wonder what that's about. And that's all. And then looking into it with a childlike but very focused curiosity about, I wonder what that could be. Regardless of what I played yesterday or 1,000 times before, this is what's happening now. So I think I hope that maybe says something about it, Jack, in terms of your question. And as I say, it's a very fundamentally, it's a seeking of some kind of real truth in the practice room, uh, without an ego attachment, and that in itself, to me, is an extremely healthy thing to be doing on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
on every level.
That word ego is an interesting one. It's often like used in lots of different ways in different contexts. How do you view it in regards to music and practice and performance? Because I think it's an important one for musicians, and particularly with regards to what you're talking about, which is being authentic and honest in the practice room.
Well, it's a slippery word, and I'm probably using it imprecisely. I mean, it has very precise definitions and so on. But I don't know. It's again, perhaps it's the sea change between the practice room world and the stage world. Uh, in the practice room, I think we want to be very ego-less as much as we can, in the sense that we're noticing moment to moment the isness of what's happening outside of us. What's really happening with my body? What's really happening with the notes, regardless of what I wish it to be. So that's a very nice, just like a sitting meditation or anything else. It's like a kind of meditation where you let go of ego controls of your processes. And then on when you're performing, then each one of us performs really like no one else. We have our own self that becomes part of the equation, and I think it's a joy to bring that into it and let our own feelings uniquely and thoughts interact with the musical stimulus. Not copying anyone else's performance or doing what teachers have said, but you know bringing our own thing to it, but with the sense of not only expressing our own self, but as I said before, uh, offering that into this beautiful, almost sacred space of having listeners there to be part of it too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. No, that's really helpful. So yeah, we're kind of wrapping up now. There's just a few questions I kind of had, kind of developing these questions for the podcasts. Some of them might be cheesy, but we ask all the people at the end. I guess the first one was really about you've done music your whole life, and often I think that disciplines that we spend a lot of time with and we care a lot about, they often teach us more about or as much about life as they do the practice itself. Do you see what I mean? And I'm kind of wondering if there's any great lessons that you feel that music has helped you with or taught you about.
Well, I guess really we've touched on a lot of these things already. Objectivity, in the way I've described, kind of acceptance, mindfulness. I know it's an overused word, but I think it's lovely. Mindfulness of what's happening every moment, and I would add to that a kind of resourcefulness. Um, I think that's one of the reasons why people who've been trained in music and done some successful things in it are very often snapped up by other companies in other fields, saying, "We'll train you to, learn this software or whatever." To knowing, I think people intuit that there's also just kind of a resourcefulness and a problem-solving um, acumen that you develop from doing rigorous music on a high level, or really challenging yourself. So those are I guess, would be the main things.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you've had a lot of teachers, some good mentors. Are there any standout pieces of advice that they've given you over the years? You've obviously mentioned a few, particularly that quote from Mittman, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
No, most of the advice I got from about pragmatic things and artistic things and how they come together came from Mittman. I've already mentioned most of those. The other person that I should say who influenced me and inspired me and opened up a vista for me was Eloise Ristad, who wrote this book, A Soprano on Her Head. Ristad, Eloise Ristad. Her work with musicians was the other piece in what I've done pedagogically. How you can do workshops where you ask people to do outrageous things or new things or free things or trust each other, become playful again, and combine that with the exciting rigors of doing music on a high level. So I'd like to mention her name too, in terms of the composite of people who've influenced me in a what I think is a fortunate way.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you, William, very much for coming on the podcast today. It's been really good. I really appreciate you being the first one. That's great.
Great pleasure and honor for me too, Jack. Thank you so very much.
Is there any other thoughts or last things that you want to say?
No, but you hinted at something in one of your questions, which we should touch on very briefly, which is that the
Sure.
science, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think
Oh
I'm
yeah, I
right in
forgot
saying
that one.
the brain science, especially neuroscience, which is the big new field, is I think beginning to support a lot of the things we've talked about. Um, that when you're taking risks with your process and the brain is intrigued with that, appropriate risks, that, not doing the safe, tried and true, but challenging yourself in a way that's exciting. The brain likes it, it's energized, it wants to remember that experience and, you know, perhaps even uh, produce more myelin to protect it with the nerve pathways. I don't really know what I'm talking about when I say that, but I mean there's writing about this and studies about this kind of things that what they're calling deliberate practice or focused practice um, not just routine mind-numbing practice, but really engaged practicing, problem solving is
Mm.
neurologically exciting.
Daniel
And
Coyle talks about it in
yes,
his
Daniel
book,
Coyle.
actually. I'll
I mean,
link to that.
I can't assess the worthiness of those claims, but that's what I'm talking about. And I think other things like that are happening too. So it could be that the things that have been passed down over the generations that felt right to people on every level, and I really believe this heartily,
Yeah.
the things that have felt right and most productive will turn out to be borne out by the science.
Hmm.
You asked me something about enjoyment in your notes, and I've been doing some research using motion capture technology and brain scanning and things like that with a team of other people um, to assess what happens when you invite a pianist to just not try to play so correctly at this moment, but just think about enjoying yourself when you play the same piece. What happens if we don't define what that means? What are the observable things they might do differently when they just quote enjoy themselves? And so this is of great interest to me to see if there's something as loose sounding as that can actually have measurable and scientific benefits.
And is the research still going on at the moment?
Yeah, well, we've done a kind of a pilot study, which we've been writing up and getting those articles published, and it remains to be seen if we'll be doing a more extended study on it. But I think this is the first time the concept of enjoyment has been used as a variable in these kind of scientific studies.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I've seen some videos on that, actually, so I'll link to that as well.
Yeah.
That's great. So
So no, that's it. So, but yeah, it's
so
been really
so you're working on that. Is there any what else is next for you? What else are you up to at the moment?
well. I don't know when it will happen, but I would like to eventually be able to produce a new edition of The Perfect Wrong Note, which would include videos so that I could show the things that I'm pantomiming here in my
Mhm.
house in Texas and you can't see, uh, and just show people what I mean, because there's no way that a book or even the words we're saying today can quite convey, the physicality of the kind of things I'm talking
For
about. So
sure.
I'd love to be able to achieve that so I can, just find a way to make this message ever clearer and more vivid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let us know when that's
Sure,
coming. Yeah,
absolutely.
really interested. Great. Well, thanks again very much.
Thank you. Great
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. Bye.
Bye.